Hello, and welcome to today's Innovative July Hot Topic, Metadata Transformation Basics. Like all of our monthly sessions, Metadata Transformation Basics will focus on the key points of this in-demand skill, helping you face your fears and grounding you in the basic principles of the discipline as taught to you by an experienced feet-on-the-street expert who both practices the skill herself and teaches it to others. So without further ado, let's put some faces with our voices. My name is Bill Tarpitzofer, and I'll be your moderator today for chat, and I'm an Innovative Senior Consultant here at Innovative. And joining me today is Martha Rice-Sanders. Will be presenting today about the metadata transformation, and she's also an Innovative Senior Consultant. So let's talk about quickly why we're here. We want to have a conversation about metadata transformation. Please chat your thoughts and questions to the panelists as they occur. Get your answers to Martha's questions as she poses them, and I will bring them into the conversation. Today we are going to cover debunking the myths of metadata modernization, basic principles of metadata modernization, getting started with metadata management, and setting a foundation for the future at your library. Now, before we go any further, let's make sure our webinar conversation facilities are working with a practice chat. Please pass us a question or a note on a topic in chat that you want to make sure that we cover today. Or please at least let us know where you're coming in from. So in general, why hot topics? Why metadata transformation? You might be asking yourself, why is Innovative investing so heavily in hot topics? Thankfully, the answer here is pretty simple. So simple that by now, you might be tired of hearing us say it, but we'll do it again anyway, just in case. This time, paraphrasing the words of our Senior Vice President of Product Strategy, Catherine Harnish, the times they are a-changin'. This statement here from 2007 is a bit old, 11 years in fact, but is still true and now more immediate than ever. The future is about knowledge enablement, the heart of what we do in the library. And if we're to respond successfully to the challenges this quote outlines, we must go farther, faster, together. Toward that end, hot topics are a place to start, a place of conversation and shared inquiry into areas of key strategic value that can help us do just that. Each topic is presented by a doer, not simply a talker, someone or a team of folks with real-life experience in the area, success and lessons learned we can all benefit from sharing in as we move forward into the future, in and through our systems, beyond the bounds of current library systems, onto the web and into the digital lives of our patrons. For 2018, these handful hotbeds of library activity, strategy, and emerging value include mindful leadership, a key change management skill for the service professionals of the library and their patrons, funders, and supporters. Digital literacy, a key teaching skill impacting learner success, inquiry, and knowledge enablement, a skill that patron-facing librarians in both public and academic libraries teach on a daily basis. Usability, an essential skill in and beyond the ILS that helps us create and design digital suites that engage our patrons and end users where they are daily, online, in the learning management system or their phones and tablets, living digitally enabled lives. Today's topic, metadata modernization, is an essential knowledge enablement skill we must master if we are to drive today's and tomorrow's learning, inquiry, and research experiences inside and outside of the library via our catalog. Product management, a survival skill we need to ensure our funding, digital, teaching, and other projects are delivered on time and on budget against requirements that meet our users' needs in measurable and responsible ways. And finally, engagement, a survival skill set we need to guide our paths forward into the future of our libraries in measurable, demonstrable ways. So in general, that's where we're coming from with the Hot Topic series. And today, without further ado, here is Martha to talk about metadata transformation.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Metadata is information in and beyond content, helpful context, if you will, that we create, collect, and record in the hopes that it will be usable by us and others to help us enable learning, inquiry, and research. Libraries have been creating metadata in a machine parsable, if not machine actionable way, for over 50 years, with the invention and application of MARC, encoding details and collections and services in the library catalog along with its connections to other library catalogs since the inception of the automated card catalog and OPACs. But first, a little bit about me. I've been working in libraries and creating and curating metadata since 1979, when I began by cataloging sound recordings at the University of Illinois Music Library while getting my master's in Library of Science there. Since coming to Innovative 2 years ago, I've been helping libraries understand their metadata both within and outside the ILS. Outside of work, I sing in 2 choirs, I grow a lot of my own fruits and vegetables with my husband, and of course, I read avidly. I live in Massachusetts, an hour south of Boston, and just over the border from Providence, Rhode Island. My recent work centers around metadata workflows, including cataloging and authority control, as well as helping libraries pave the way from MARC to a BibFrame-like environment for metadata. But enough about me. Let's talk for a minute about catalogs. They are about knowledge organization, or said another way, systematically arranged enumeration of available items with descriptive details. And they are all about economical directions to products, services, and experiences delivered by an organization, a company, or an institution. They're also historical records of an organization, company, or institution assembled for and offered to its constituencies. And they're the property of that organization, company, or institution under the ownership and control of those entities, usually residing at their location and offered to us on site through the mail or over the internet. So catalogs include sales catalogs, which are focused on direct sales. Directory catalogs focused on directing individuals to one another via their names, numbers, address, and locations, as well as cross-references, rather like phone books and library authorities. Library catalogs, of course, which are focused on directing users to the correct shelf location or online access point as a way to speed access and save time for both users and librarians. And finally, online catalogs. Any or all of the above added to the web to increase visibility and reach users where they are amidst their digital lives in a way that increases relevancy rankings in search engines and social spaces. With this background, let's head into today's topic of metadata transformation. These hot topics always start with debunking the myths. So let's start by debunking some, which are mostly simply a reality check on its future promise, starting with the most prevalent, which is MARC is dead, or MARC must die, as famously stated by Roy Tennant in Library Journal in 2007. And then stated again when Diane Hillman continued by saying the work of MARC is like arranging deck chairs on the Titanic, implying we could already see that iceberg heading for us. These images are by Marc Chagall, by the way, and they're what I found when I Googled the search, did a Google search for is MARC dead? And of course, it's not dead. We use it all the time, and we rely on it. It's still here, and it's still going strong, even in the era of BibFrame, Library of Congress's linked data environment, which has been around since 2012. We still use MARC to run our systems and exchanges, and we've added new fields and subfields to make it more modern, such as URIs and relator codes. But Roy Tennant's original points are just as relevant today, perhaps more so. MARC may be holding us back, and it is a digital carrier now over 50 years old. As Peter Murray said in his blog post, we think of discrete records that describe these things rather than a network, or more accurately, a graph of interrelated nodes. This forces us to focus on the textual content of fields and not on the relationships between things. Note his emphasis on relationships. We'll be talking about that a lot in our time together. Replacing MARC will help libraries present experiences our modern users have come to expect when they're online, experiences they have with Amazon and Facebook, with Alexa and Siri. The next myth, MARC is the problem. Well, MARC was developed as a communications tool for library metadata. It was never intended as a database structure. So let's look at carrier type to see this. On the left side of the screen is the MARC vocabulary, and on the right side, a draft display from our next generation development team at Innovative. You can see that storing those forms and formats in the MARC codes as these terms, or even their numerical equivalent, and then translating it to what we wish to display to our users is cumbersome. This illustrates the workflow issue where we regularly strip out incoming information from publishers' EDI and ONIX metadata that uses the terms our users have come to recognize. We replace them with these MARC vocabularies, and then we translate them back to the terms they recognize, if we can. So the reality is that MARC is more than encoding. It is a carrier of context, a language, if you will, of library metadata. And like any language, it's a carrier of culture, our library culture of learning, literacy, research, and inquiry. We are lucky enough to have many languages and many national libraries who've been working together in interrelated and coordinated ways across the decades. Think of national bibliographies, cataloging policies, authorities, and so on. So our contexts are interrelated and can be part of this transformation process. With these new possibilities, does thinking about MARC in this way as an open door to the future allow you to see things that you may not have been apparent before? If you have thoughts about that, please chat them to Bill and he'll bring them into our conversation. And again, if you think about MARC in this way, as a door opening to the future, what might you see that you may not have seen before? And while people are thinking through that, we'll go on to our next myth. RDA is the answer. If MARC is the problem, then RDA is the answer. Or said another way, RDA combined with BibFrame and the Library Reference Model, or LRM, frees us from the problems of standard MARC. But the reality is that RDA is just one part of a larger solution, one that starts to step outside the boundaries of our library silos of discrete records, addresses some of the challenges of MARC and past standards, but carries with it a bit too much of that past and our siloed data. To illustrate, library resources are far more than books. We collect music, events, rooms, equipment, rocks and other physical items, makerspaces, videos, software, augmented and virtual reality, special collections, ebooks, databases, and so on. So R is equal to resource, but resources are more diverse than WEMI, which is the work, expression, manifestation, and item coming from FRBR, or functional requirements for bibliographic records. What is an expression? Do we all agree, and can we record it economically? Does it match the way content creators outside the library describe their content? Does it match how publishers describe that content? And are these distractions important to our end users? Do they help them? Do they help us meet the needs in an increasingly digital world, or might they just muddy things? BibFrame's object model offers many advantages as a conceptual and logical model. As being implemented by the Library of Congress now, and by the linked data for production adopters, and by the end of this year, innovative with our coming next generation tools, where work equals the conceptual essence of that knowledge, which exists in the creator or learner's mind, and where instance means the instantiation of knowledge from its creator or creators into a resource that has a material embodiment that can be shared, distributed, collected, and so on, and item, which is an actual copy of that instance. This is a question of usability and diversity and context. Current bibliographic descriptions are too narrow and too siloed to meet the needs of modern knowledge enablement. RDA is what we have, and it's getting better at articulating those relationships. There's that word again, relationships. We have RDA and lots of other diversity in our catalogs. We have AACR1, AACR2, RDA, various versions of RDA, hybrid records with the metadata from a mix of codes. And I would imagine most of us still have pre-AACR2 records, or at least content in our records. So metadata transformation is about acknowledging this and storing and differentiating our metadata appropriately, extending it in an interrelated and connected way with other standards without normalizing all of the uniqueness out of it. Access is not just an access point or a string. It's more than URL provisions and knowledge bases. It's actually knowledge enablement. It is, in context, able to drive engagement and impact and delivery of the right resource to the right person at the right time in that person's desired form. So our next myth, linked data solves it all. Adding linked data elements into our MARC records is the magic black box solving all our problems, all of those problems of context that MARC and RDA hasn't provided. But the reality is, although it doesn't solve our problems, it does set the stage for breaking down the barriers of our silos and building bridges or paths between and across the knowledge economy to increase our visibility on the web. Like RDA, linked data is part of the larger solution, but in it and of itself, not the whole solution. It's still MARC with linked data elements embedded in it in relator codes and URIs, but it's the path towards search engine optimization for MARC, and it's a great practice and preparation for true linked data. So let's pause here again for thoughts and questions about the part of the solution that RDA and linked data may provide to us. Please chat your responses to that to Bill, and he will bring them into the conversation when you have done so. So our last myth is that vendors have all the answers. No one has all the answers. Teamwork is required. We need to work together within our libraries and publishers and content providers and so many others. As we said as we began, these hot topics are a starting place. So please chat to Bill what your thoughts are on how we might better partner for library success around metadata transformation. And Bill, I'm going to pause here for a second before I go to the next section and see if anyone has chatted to you their thoughts on any of what I've discussed so far.
No, I'm not seeing anything yet, but I did have a question back from earlier. You had talked about MARC tags being stripped out when they're coming into catalog. Is that like a widespread problem where libraries are have been stripping out data from MARC records for years that they may want in the future?
That is a problem, although that's not what I meant to say, and I may have misspoken, is that what happens is that publishers output the metadata for what they've published, and we ingest it, but the codes that they use for content and carrier, like this is a video recording or it's a streaming video, the words that they use, or it's Blu-ray, are replaced with the codes in MARC in the fixed fields.
Oh.
And if we then want to display those words again to our users in our discovery platforms, we need to retranslate it back to the words that began. Does that help?
It's not so much the data, it's not that data is being lost, it's just that it's being translated in a way that's not helpful. Not entirely
it's being
helpful.
Translated and retranslated, and there's a good possibility that some of the context and some of the specificity may get lost in that process. But we will talk about removing data a bit later on. It's also something that we need to think about.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. So let me go on with part 2, which are basic principles of metadata transformation. So now that we've grounded ourselves in these realities, let's discuss some of those basic principles. The first one is evidence basis. We start by acknowledging that the evidence of our current MARC-based ILSs, our current MARC record exchanges and metadata collaboratives, MARC authorities, MARC policies and unified workflows, and that MARC itself is fully integrated and ingrained in the library functions of today. That's what the evidence tells us, and that's what we know. And despite the fact that we may have reached the limits of MARC's extensibility. So where do we begin, seeing that apparently we are in a paradox of non-backwards compatibility and the realities of how long it takes and how much it would cost to replace the entire infrastructure of our metadata from the ground up? Is there a path to making the change into native linked data that is at least partially evolutionary or incremental? And so we've looked at the evidence for that. And the next step is to start with knowns and define our box. Transferring MARC into modern metadata is a bit like modernizing a car as we continue to drive it and rely on it. The simplest way to begin is by changing our perspective. We know MARC is not in our future, and it's mismatched to the ways in which content creators, providers, and owners, such as publishers, aggregators, government, other content and intellectual property owners, create, sell, resell, distribute, and deliver content to the marketplace, including to libraries and their end users and patrons. And it's mismatched to the ways in which libraries purchase, license, and provide access to that content, and in which library patrons and potential patrons seek and acquire information and knowledge via search engines and digital marketplaces, in virtual classrooms and through the learning management systems, via connected applications and marketplaces such as Amazon, LinkedIn, Instagram, and the like. When thinking about what we want our metadata to do, the evidence discourages us from thinking about those theories and concepts or models behind bibliographic metadata in MARC. Rather, we can view it as a dialect, a variant, some speak, in our legacy systems. And as we're talking about evidence bases here, we will look at MARC as implemented and used today. It's optimized for the needs of today's users in our legacy and existing systems. Our discovery systems were designed as a first stop on the user's information-seeking journey, but many users are no longer there. They start in Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, or Facebook, in learning management systems and digital classrooms on their phones and tablets and apps. Those are our patrons' first stop. They often come to our discovery systems once they know enough detail about that known item they're looking for to find it in our catalog, so they can check it out or access it. So for MARC, we just have to have the identifiers our users have looked for first. Those identifiers, their finding aids and recommendation engines of choice have provided with them and put them in our records. We can leave all the other cool stuff we want to do in next generation applications that have next-gen metadata platforms required to support them, our end use and resources themselves natively. This is just one example of how simple things can get quickly when we redefine the box to a smaller set of things a user or user-focused approach may do for us. Which brings us to principle number 4, detail your current state. And looking at our current state, I see that duplicate bibliographic records are increasing. Persistent identifiers are lacking in those bibliographic records. Forms and formats of bibliographic records are divergent. The record supply is increasing, especially with the proliferation of collections of electronic resources. And it gets very expensive, which all contributes to a loss of high-quality user experiences and to the loss of user attention and attentiveness. Our user-focused approach here allows us to continue cataloging while we wait for the release of those next-generation platforms and applications that may afford us more value in patron-facing applications, more avenues of metadata enhancement, and more flexibility in the ways we manage our resources, metadata, and the constituencies we serve. What else do you find frustrating in our current systems? Please chat your responses to Bill. Have you seen adverse impacts in the performance of your system, in your end users' experiences, in your own productivity?
Hi, Martha, this is Bill. I'm apparently not seeing the chats that are being replied, so I'm one of the other users who's sharing them with me. So let's see, I'm going to parse through here, and so let's see. Can you describe what you mean by true linked data from Elizabeth? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure. True linked data is where, so the difference is we've put some linked data elements into our MARC records. So true linked data is data that is completely articulated in triples, which we'll talk about later. So it's not taking those URIs and putting them in our records. It's actually transforming all of the information we have in our bibliographic database into linked data. I hope that helps.
Great. There's a comment from Elizabeth. I think linked data could definitely help with the problem with many separate records for different versions of the same work, especially where patron holds are concerned.
Absolutely. I completely agree with Elizabeth. In a true linked data environment, and we'll talk about this a little bit, the top of the pyramid of the data, if you will, is the work, which is a combination of title and author with the concepts or subjects around it. If we start with that and then we, if you will, connect to it or wrap around it all of those different versions of that work, we should get back to what I actually did presentations about, 15 years ago with Ferber, about how we would be able to better present what we own to our users.
Great.
Other thoughts, questions?
A question from Laura. Publisher records are less than ideal in terms of authority, accuracy, and consistency of coding. Are we lowering our standards?
Oh, such a good question. That is how I have felt for decades, and the evidence were the publisher records that I would see in OCLC and Sky River. I just finished teaching the metadata boot camp with Laura Dawson, who is a decades-long professional in metadata from the publisher side, and I asked her to produce some slides of really good metadata from publishers, which she did. And so I'm beginning to see that they output a lot of some publishers, not all, high-quality metadata, which we can take advantage of, at least as the starting building block of our metadata.
And then a few other comments. Debbie comments, vendor records. I find that you get what you pay for. If paying for enhanced records, they are fairly decent. Quick clicks, not so much. And from Elizabeth, I always need to clean up our ebook, e-audio vendor records. But only I can manage that because I catalog for such a small library system. Yeah.
And I hear you. Before I came to Innovative, I was the authority control person for a consortium of libraries, and I was responsible for all of the authority work on the data and all of the loading of the MARC record sets for electronic resources, and it was a lot of work, and I had to make decisions about what I could and couldn't manage to do.
Great. Jennifer comments, we've been told in the past this is what the publisher gives us, so I agree that the publisher records are not always the best. And Heather comments that e-resource records can be a pain. That's for sure.
Yes, indeed.
Laura comments that productivity is impacted by the growing complexity of RDA, increase in types of subject headings, and not great ebook records.
This is all, I understand exactly what everyone's saying, and it is right. It's those bibliographic record sets for when we moved from buying our resources one by one, title by title, by collecting these large sets of ebooks and e-journals and streaming videos and sound files. It became, we had to just rely on what we were given. You can't, what is eBrary up to, 140,000 titles? You know, you can't really manage that, especially in what I call the Oz environment, where titles come and go so quickly out of these collections. I hear you.
Yes, David comments, the redundancies in the current MARC bib format are increasing at an alarming rate, supposedly to improve usability, but the extra time spent concerns me.
Again, I agree. There's lots of documentation. There's always been a lot of duplication where we have put information into fixed fields and coded fields like the geographic and time period. And as I said, I'm a music cataloger, instrumentation, and then we repeated all that information in the body of the bibliographic record. And I always hoped that we would be able to rely on the codes and then use the system to expand that to information that the users would be able to access. But I totally agree.
And that's an interesting question that you may not be able to answer specifically, but I think maybe our attendees may have some opinions on also. And that's what publisher/vendors put out the highest quality records and metadata?
I cannot answer that. I wish that Laura were on this webinar and I could ask her, but she did. I'm going to have to look it up. There is an organization for publishers, and they have agreed to certain standards for their metadata, and I can get that for people, and Bill, you can send it out in the email at the end. And what Laura said is the publishers who belong to that collective have agreed to put out the highest quality metadata that they can, and I'm trying to visualize the screen in the PowerPoint, and I'm not coming up with it, so I'm not going to pretend that I remember which publisher it was. But I will certainly get to you that the website.
Great. A few other comments.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get caught up. I think maybe there's just a few more, and then we'll go on. It won't be so many because I wasn't seeing them all at the same time.
This is all about the conversation.
Yes. In order to get a better understanding of linked data, I needed to allow users to access library material by doing Google type searches or by searching by other online engines.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Janice comments, I think Midwest Tapes records are pretty good, but other vendors charge so much for their fully cataloged records that we do our own. William comments, right. I think Cambridge University Press is doing some work on quality metadata.
I think a lot of the university presses are actually. I suspect that that's probably the case. And then it's whether you can buy that metadata or if you can access it freely when you purchase the material, the titles.
Right. And a final comment, and I'll let you go on, from Andrea. There's also pressure from library administrators to outsource our work to vendors. This mentality further hurts access and the overall qualities and usability of our online catalog. Amen.
Amen. Absolutely, Andrea. So I'm going to keep going. I'm really glad that people are chatting their thoughts and questions, your thoughts and questions, and please keep doing so. So this brings us to the fifth principle, to give shape to our dreams. So as we move from customization, as you see in the slide, and I like this shirt expense, it said, sorry, officer, I thought you wanted to race, and interruptions. From what we're outlining today, borrowing our desire to drive our classics a bit faster, this metaphor, it drives our desired outcomes to be simply a way to get a reliable daily driver without too much customization of those classics, interruption of our current workflows, or the native processes of the knowledge lifecycle our classics don't follow. And it's too much expense in the process. At least that's a concern that we have. So in this principle, it would be nice to minimize training our new hires and our public-facing staff in our legacy systems and workflows, interrupting the productivity for which they were hired and the knowledge they learned in library school. But with this said, all of those Library of Congress pilots, as well as cooperative cataloging pilots, they do make a lot of sense. The linked data for production's parsing of the varied variety of resources, resource workflows, and needs across our participating institutions and their subpartners do this. So this necessitates automating more of our workflows. But as Andrea said, if you over-automate, then you're giving a lesser experience to our users. So it's balancing the expensive retraining with wanting to maintain doing what we do. So to start small and fix our users' biggest problems first. How do we do that? Well, persistent identifiers for those things our users want most, under the identifiers they look for most often. So with persistent connections between MARC record types, that are used to drive experience and performance in our current systems, as well as historical, authoritative, valuable content that will be in our next generation metadata and solutions. These identifiers include ISBNs, ISNIs, ISNIs, ISSNs, DOIs, digital object identifiers, ORCIDs, which are identifiers for faculty, people in academia, ISANs, ISANs, EIDRs, EIDRS, and we're putting those in our subfield zeros and subfield ones. So rather than stripping out any of those, one suggestion is to leave them in our data. And finally, we need to continue to pursue cooperation in every way we can. As that linked data for production and other next generation cooperatives enhance our traditional standards process, and as library leadership redefines integrated partnerships with vendors, and as consortia and other ILSs and resource sharing cooperatives redefine their union catalogs, their shared repositories, and their integrated platform implementations, including platforms for library services, content, metadata, and research management. So before we go on to section 3, let's continue to pause. Let's pause again for thoughts and questions on that. Bill, do you see any more?
Nothing right now. There was a comment
okay.
still wrapping up from the previous section from Elizabeth. The only vendor records we keep are the ebook, e-audio, which get varying degrees of editing. Everything else gets replaced by OCLC.
I see. I see. That's very commendable. I'm jealous. So to part 3, which is about getting started with metadata transformation. The first step is to continue cataloging, of course. But let's review for a few minutes our goals for library metadata. So when we've said what have we said that we're trying to accomplish with our metadata? Starting with Charles Cutter, who embedded these in his 1869 rules for a printed dictionary catalog, the first object was to identify, to enable a person to find a book of which either the author is known, the title is known, or the subject is known, as well as collocate, to show what that library has by a given author, on a given subject, or in a given kind of literature, and evaluate, to assist in the choice of a book as to its edition and as to its character. 50 years later, Raghunathan published his 5 laws that are books are for use, books are for all, every book its reader, or every reader his book, save the time of the reader, and a library is a growing organism. So have our goals changed from these? If you ignore that these are book-centric and male-centric language, Bill, what do you think? And everyone else, please chat your thoughts.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question? I was trying to fix chat.
Absolutely. So when we think about what we're trying to accomplish with our metadata that we create and put in front of our users, is this still what we're trying to do, or have we changed our goals?
No, I think it is still what we're trying to do. Yeah, I think they're still relevant. Obviously, the not physical objects all the time anymore. But yeah, I don't think that has really changed a lot.
I tend to agree, but I'm curious, does anybody else have any thoughts about that? And I'm going to keep going, but please do chat your thoughts and Bill will bring them in. So in this next section, we're going to talk about a little 15-year history tour of metadata modernization. In the first round, starting in 2006, it began with a simple update of the cataloging rules to accommodate the digital resources increasingly dominating library collections, budgets, and circulation statistics, which of course is what we've been talking about, right, is all of these e-collections that we've been acquiring for our users. But FRBR got in the way. Well, WEMI, which is work, expression, manifestation, and item did, and slowed it up. And now, with 15 years hindsight, we missed addressing two key things: the real concerns about the cost of implementing work, expression, manifestation, and item within our bibliographic data, sorting out that work from the expression and the manifestation of each new purchase is too expensive both in terms of the cost and when implemented, particularly when parsed into MARC, which is mismatched with this model. And the native formats, that is, the carrier types, extent, licensing associated with publishers, aggregators, academic institutions, governments, and other content and intellectual property owners who create, sell, resell, distribute, and deliver digital and electronic content to the marketplace, including our libraries and our users, as well as with libraries which purchase, license, and provide access to digital content, and with the library patrons and potential patrons seeking information and knowledge increasingly since 2006 over the internet and through learning management systems. Distance education was then becoming online education, and the digital publishing revolution started in the 1990s was maturing into a new way of doing business in the content business. So I want to review a little bit about FRBR, which stands for Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records. So this was the next really serious attempt to define what we want to do when we develop our bibliographic metadata. So the Group 1 entities, which are the products of intellectual, artistic, and work endeavor, the work, which is the intellectual concept, is realized through an expression which embodies that concept. And you can see in the graphic that a novel could be expressed in either the original text or a translation or a critical edition. And that, that expression is embodied in a manifestation, which is exemplified by an item. And at that point, you can touch it and add it to the collection. So when I say WEMI, that's what I'm talking about. And the intent is that everything that we catalog, we think about those four parts of it when we are putting data, bibliographic data, into our systems. But FRBR also defined user tasks. So it said that what people want to do from our bibliographic metadata is to find, identify, select, and obtain those titles we collect for them or provide access to online. There were two companion functional requirement publications put out by IFLA, which is the International Federation of Libraries and Associations. One was called Functional Requirements for Authority Data, which described what we want to do with author authority, and Functional Requirements for Subject Authority Data, or FASAD, which is what we wanted, what we thought was necessary for our subject authorities. And again, so it's find, identify, select, and obtain, and from FASAD, Functional Requirement for Authority Data, we got explore. Again, are these so very different from what Cutter and Raghunathan had defined as our purposes? Bill, do you have thoughts on that, or others?
Yeah, there was a comment from Elizabeth. I think the 5 laws imply that patrons know what they are looking for, which they may not.
Oh, very true. Absolutely true, Elizabeth. So really, this explore piece that we get from the functional requirements for subject data is the first time, perhaps, that we have addressed that. Both Raghunathan and Cutter assumed, as she said, that each person walking in already knew something about what they were looking for. And certainly today's students often come in knowing not so much, right? I have more experience in academic libraries than in public libraries, but I suspect that public libraries also have people who walk in or who access their website who only have a vague idea of what they want, or what they hope to find. And I'd be interested to, if there are public people from public libraries on this, in this webinar, if that is true or not.
And there was also a comment from Wendy that I'm not sure of the answer, or a comment. She says FISO, F-I-S-O principles rule here. And I'm not sure what that acronym stands for. Are you familiar with that one, Martha?
I am not, at least not.
Okay. Hopefully Wendy will chat back to another
Wendy, please let us know.
Ask what our FISO principles do.
I did a quick Google search. What does it stand for?
Yeah, I couldn't find it either.
And it's not giving me an obvious answer. So I'd love to know what that stands for.
Find, identify, select, and obtain.
Oh, okay. Just like Wendy is work, expression, manifestation, and item. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So it's find, identify, select, and obtain. Thank you so much, which are the four uses for metadata as defined. And so now that we know what FISO stands for, what was her comment?
She just said that the FISO principles rule here.
Yes, exactly. With the addition of explore.
Right.
So here's my first. Yes, please.
I'll tell you what, another comment from William. There are some questions around whether the 5 user tasks are actually what our patrons are doing in our catalog. I think obtain is probably what many are hoping for when they enter our spaces.
Sure, that's right. They all lead to obtain, right? If you can't obtain, if the patron walks out without obtaining something, then we failed them, right?
Right.
Finding that you have things and not being able to obtain what you found is a failure. Now maybe it's checked out and they can put a hold on it, or it's lost. It depends on the reason that they didn't obtain it. Or they may simply have not found anything that matched what they were looking for. It's true. So here is my first of several hints on what we can do now as a workflow change that may help us move forward. And by move forward, I mean, and by this one, clean up your bibliographic data. What I mean by that is to look for ways to reduce the mix of cataloging codes in your bibliographic database wherever possible, to use the current MARC format, and to keep current on ILS software releases. So the second half of round B, skip ahead to 2010 and the official release and adoption of RDA, the work, expression, manifestation, and itemification of the cataloging standards, with an implied conceptual model, that is, FRBR, and no new logical or physical model or object carrier to replace MARC. Despite massive changes in the knowledge lifecycle, as we said, and in libraries, since the inception of FRBR in the 1990s, as to how resources that libraries acquire are created, sold, distributed, sought, found, and accessed. RDA moved forward with MARC still practically the only carrier for that metadata that we built. What did we learn by that? As pointed out in the myth section, resources are more than books, and the models by which we create better MARC today and native library linked data tomorrow can't be bound or driven by books. And further, records don't actually represent the content objects distributed in the knowledge lifecycle today, especially records that don't contain persistent identifiers. The more complete the metadata is that we create today as we move to tomorrow's native library linked data must address this problem. If our better MARC is going to feed Facebook, Google, Amazon, and the likes recommendation and referencing engines, and allow us any hope of understanding how this drives traffic back into the library and its resources, services, and tools. The cost of staying in our silos, of doing things our way first, and then hoping to connect to them to the larger web world outside is even higher. And just to say within here, we learned in the 2000s that it was very expensive to redo our workflows around RDA and WEMI and FRBR. So the next solution to linked datafy, I should have that in quotes, RDA and WEMI. So to demonstrate what I mean about MARC, we've continued to develop it to include or to shoehorn more and more data into our bibliographic and authority records, including ways to code relationships and identifiers. And let's take a look at some current MARC data. This is a screenshot of a MARC record that has relationship designators there, which help identify the relationship of the people or concepts to the content or the title or work, such as whether someone is the composer or the performer or the conductor or all three from my music life. These subfield E's you see here define each person's relationship to the work, that is, the title in the bibliographic record. Coding other relationships in MARC becomes more difficult, such as a relationship between two different people who worked on that title or between two different works. Much of the detail about those relationships is documented in the text of the title fields and in note fields, and not in relationship codes that can be read and used by computers. The URIs, or subfield zeros, point to persistent identifiers. In this record, it's the Library of Congress Authority records. In testing, it's become clear that we can't add identifiers to complex subject headings, that is, with subdivisions. And these URIs aren't actionable, and by that mean we don't have the capacity or the tools at the moment to put the rich and detailed information available in those authority records in front of our users through these URIs. So my next hint is that authority records and the access points in bibliographic records matching them will play an important role in successful transformation of our metadata. And so I suggest that we all strive to keep the access points in our bibliographic data current with whatever chosen authority vocabularies we are using. On to round two. Jump to 2012, the beginning of BibFrame, when the library community took its first steps toward native linked data. But there were funding difficulties. Linked data, RDA training, and revamping of systems are all very expensive. National testing in the United States showed that WEMI, or Work Expression Manifestation and Item, in RDA is problematic at best and perhaps might be unworkable. Our systems and business organizations need to be modernized first. We need clear definitions, a full relationship model, and industry standardization. The good news is that we have learned from those lessons during round one, and we have begun to experiment in collaborative ways, collecting evidence, and we can move from those experiments to an evidence-based development process shown by the initial release and followed by the ongoing extension of BibFrame 2.0. This can be our launching pad out of MARC to accommodate the diversity of resources and constituencies. Also in 2016 came IFLA's Functional Requirement Consolidation with the publication of Library Reference Model, or LRM. Take a look at it. It's only 36 pages in total. Check out the methodology section in it with its discussion of objects, linked data, and how to address the varied legacy systems populating our systems today, and leading to addressing them in a manner that does not corrupt the metadata as we move toward linked data. Which leads us to the beginning of round three, the publication of the LRM, But this necessitates more study and more evidence collection in live metadata systems and in the library community, and we're just starting to do that. IFLA's official adoption of the LRM, or Library Reference Model, occurred in the last half of 2017. So let's look a little bit at the Library Reference Model and what it is and what it brings to the table. The core of the Library Reference Model is the definition of and the declaration of relationships between the different elements of metadata. Work, expression, manifestation, and item is retained, but defined and given use cases. And the quote is from LRM itself: relationships between works, expressions, manifestations, and items are the core of the model. So the whole LRM is built around that assumption. 36 different relationships are declared and defined in a hierarchical structure, and as I said, with WEMI retained. In terms of relationships, which we keep coming back to, each is declared and defined. These are some examples where res, which is one of the new concepts that comes with LRM, res being Latin for thing, which is able to stand for anything. So in this last example, it means that that work has a subject, which could be anything. But you can see all of the relationships are declared. Here's a graphic showing some of those relationships within the model in relationship to the RDA itself. Here, again, res stands for the name of any person, place, or time span. So you can see here that the lines are the links between, so anything, it has a name, or it's a place, or it's associated with a time span. Agent, which is a person, and that agent may be a writer or illustrator or composer. So the work, expression, manifestation, and item are created or modified by this person. This person is a type of collective agent, which might mean composers or professors or something else. So I hope that this graphic explains that a little bit, how all of those relationships are built in. So as part of round 3, we can keep up with our the LD for P, which is the linked data for production, adopted BibFrame 2.0 as the, so BibFrame 1.0, which was defined with Ferber, and BibFrame 2.0 has LRM as its underlying model. And it's being used by the Library of Congress to develop the linked data environment that they're using. We can keep up with this effort to create a native linked data environment for library metadata by watching the work of the LD for P community, the Library of Congress, and PCC, that's Program for Cooperative Cataloging websites, as well as attending the BibFrame forums at ALA conferences, subscribing to the BibFrame listserv, seeing what NISO, which is the national, what is NISO stand for? It's for standards, the National Standards Organization has to offer. So even if we're not actually applying it now, we can keep up with what is being done by those who are working on it. So a few words here about linked data. We see the effects of it all the time, and so do our users, of course. It comes from exposing and connecting data on the web from different sources. So when I search the name of my town, Seekonk, the knowledge panel on the right side of the Google results is populated from linked data sources. So the data that's being brought in, it can be done because that data is identified on the other end as to what it is. So there we can get the weather, the hotels, and the zip code, and so on from the data that is that it pulls in. So rewriting our metadata into triples for linked data can help to convey relationships. And to be published on the web as linked data, metadata needs to be recoded as triples. And the more triples that are in our data, the more successfully users will find our collections in the vast sea of web resources. So a few words about linked triples. They are data written in 3 parts, the middle part of which the predicate is the relationship. So RDF comes from the World Wide Web Consortium specifications, and it's the model that's used for the interchange of data on the web. So here are some triples defined by LRM, that a work is authored by an agent. So work is our title, an agent is the author or the composer or some other person who is part of creating that work. The work has a subject of whatever topic it has, and the work is published in a particular geographical location. So in triples, the parts on the left and the right are considered endpoints, and the middle part is the relationship between those 2 elements. So as we think about moving from MARC to BibFrame, in MARC, as we've said, the more identifiers we have in our data, the better. So please consider keeping all of these in your data and not stripping them out. And those triples, by the way, work best with unique persistent identifiers as the endpoints when possible. So in BibFrame, for links between bibliographic data and the publisher data, the vendor data, and other data, with which you can use to enrich the starting point with what the publisher, vendor, and other places have provided, and the links between them are, as we said, the identifiers, the ISBNs, the ISNs, and so on. So when the question was about what is true linked data is where you have what are called resources. This is in BibFrame. So a work is a resource, a person or agent is a resource, every subject or concept is a resource. So those resources are tied together through the links. So keep all those identifiers in our bibliographic records. This will help us as we move forward. Consider no longer deleting any ISSNs, ISBNs, SANs, but also MESH, FAST, and other subject vocabularies, even if they're not the ones that you specifically use in your system.
Hey, Martha.
Yes.
Yeah, before you go on, there was a comment from William that he said, sometimes I'm tempted to strip out ISBNs that are redundant for a particular record, for example, print and ebook records, but otherwise I agree about keeping all IDs.
Yeah, and it can get really messy, right, when you keep it all, because as someone who spent 10 years using the innovative ERM system, it was, when you were doing the coverage matching, it was important to have the right ISSN in the bibliographic record to make that match. So I agree that we need to think about the whole picture. Go ahead.
Great. And then there another question from Laura. Do we keep print ISBNs and ebook records, or should we keep print ISBNs and ebook records?
Oh, that's such a good and complicated question. It seems very simple. As I go further along down this path, I think it could cause problems to put print ISBNs in electronic ebook records and the eISBNs in our print records. And I'm on the fence on this one. And I still need to see, at the moment, Innovative has some development partners, and we are pulling the metadata out of their catalogs and putting it through the process to become linked data. And I want to see the results of that. We talked about evidence-driven, right? And see if that causes confusion at the other end, or if it doesn't matter, if the title is the title and the print and the electronic are two different instances, and then maybe it doesn't matter anymore so long as there's a way to identify which one you have so that you can point the user in the right direction to either a bookshelf or to the web. I'm not sure if that helped or not.
So a couple follow-up questions. Should the proper ISBN be listed first, or does it matter? And would you keep, for example, a large print ISBN in a record for a regular print item?
I think I have the same answer there. I think we need to look and see what happens when we do that. I think that's confusing the data, and but again, I need to wait and see how that's parsed out. But definitely, I would list the appropriate one first in all cases, the applicable one first.
Right. Okay. The comment from Andrea. We're currently keeping these fields in our records, especially subject genre headings from multiple vocabularies. I'm sure my decision to do this has irked my staff over the years, but I feel it's a good decision for the future of our catalog because we can't put them back in later when some system or person says we need to have them. I think that's a great comment.
I'm on Andrea's side on that one. And here's where I come down. And this is something that I've spent a year now kind of been delving into all of this and trying to understand how it might work at the other end. So my consortium had 12 hospital libraries in it, and so we had both Library of Congress subject headings and MESH in our bibliographic metadata. And by the way, it is, some of the authority control vendors are able to put back in a vocabulary that you have stripped out. Before the libraries joined our consortium, it was all academic libraries, and when the libraries joined, we were able to send out our bibliographic records to an authority control vendor, and they were able to reinsert MESH into our existing records, presumably by matching it up using an identifier, right, either the ISBN or perhaps an OCLC number. So it is possible to do that. It's not cheap. But I saw that, but so here's where I come into my linked data piece. Even if you're not using MESH, MESH is a connection to PubMed and to other resources put out by the National Library of Medicine. And so if we keep the MESH in our records, and if that is incorporated into the linked data, then there might be, we might be able to put in front of our users all of the articles on that topic by its connection through the MESH heading. So that's how I imagine it working. And there are ways, and I know Sierra best, and it's probably true in Polaris as well and other systems, there are ways to keep those in our records without indexing them as subjects if we don't want to do that.
Right, right.
So we can retain data without indexing it in a way that might be confusing to our users. Right.
So I just have a few more comments on the ISBN thing, and then I have one final question for you before you move on.
Okay.
So Josh says, I have a hard time keeping all those ISBNs in records as our ILS tries to combine records per deduplication standards. Yes. Debbie says keeping different Debbie says keeping different ISBNs in makes it confusing for the ordering process. It looks like we own something we do not actually own. Again.
Good point.
Totally makes sense.
Very good point.
Janice comments, many ISBNs in the records causes us problems with overlaying during importing. Yes, and Stephanie ditto on the overlay issue. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Right. If you overlay on the ISBN, then that would be something you would not want to do.
And then finally, the question, Janice wants to know, can you speak a bit about FAST headings, F-A-S-T headings, acronym FAST?
Sure. FAST stands for, I can't remember, it's F-A-S-T, and it's a faceted subject vocabulary developed by OCLC. And the intent is to break apart, so in Library of Congress we have what's called a pre-coordinated subject, so we might have United States history, 1861 to 865, Civil War, dictionaries. So instead of having that all in one string, it takes those different components and each one has its own field. So the fact that it's about United States is by itself, the fact that it's about history by itself, the fact that it's about the event of the Civil War has its own field, and the fact that it's a dictionary has another field. So that's how FAST works. They actually, if you search OCLC FAST, they have a tool where you can put in a Library of Congress subject, and it will show you what the FAST headings fields would look like. But it's not. It's really meant so. It's really it's post coordination. The system would search for those different factors and then build the full topic by what the user has selected as part of their search. Was that helpful?
Yeah, and there's another comment from Andrea. Also, with the profusion of headings in our bibliographic records, regardless of their source, it's even harder than ever to police the headings in our incoming records and strip out those we don't want or don't like. Our director wants us to outsource 98 to 99% of our cataloging, which will further give subject work over to the vendors, most of which don't care much about it.
It's really hard, isn't it? You know, we want to do things efficiently, but we don't want to undermine our effectiveness. I remember a good friend of mine used to use this as tagline on his emails: more, better, faster, cheaper, pick two. And I still think of that all the time. We can't do all four, and we need to do what ultimately is best for our users in giving them the tools they need to find what we've collected for them.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So we are still in round 3, and we now come to the rewriting of the RDA. It's not called a code anymore. I'm blanking on the word, but to accommodate both LRM and BibFrame. So we're going to complete our walk through cataloging history with BibFrame 2.0 and the linked data for production. LRM's adoption led to the rewriting of RDA, which was published in the toolkit in beta last month. And the project was called the 3R project if you want to find more out about it. But it has the LRM, or the library reference model, as the conceptual model underlying the code. It rethinks the guidelines for what we record in each metadata field within from the model's point of view, and how to express relationships between those different pieces of metadata. The innovative next generation metadata development incorporates both LRM as a model and BibFrame as the environment for the metadata in it. And Bill and I want to continue to hear your thoughts and comments. And while you are writing more about your thoughts about potentially about LRM and BibFrame and the modernization of metadata, here are some questions to get us started. Is it too little and too late? Do these changes take us farther and faster together? Or as my friend said, more, better, faster, cheaper? Or did they just slow us down again? Are they worth the added expense in staff training and retraining, writing policy statements and documentation, reworking, that the unnumbered, and by the way, the new code has all the numbering's been removed, and the reorganization of the rules may cost us? Does this give us enough bang for our opportunity cost buck? And let me say, in terms of that unnumbering, Innovative has a seat on the PCC, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging Board, by virtue of having Sky River, and I'm currently our representative to the PCC. And there is a lot of concern about how the unnumbering of these will work its way through the system, and how usable will it be. So that's very much still up for discussion. And must we, as with past cataloging rules, all make the same adoption choice at the same time? Or are we free enough, and are the rules we use flexible enough to allow each institution to make its own choices to best fit your needs at the moment? And honestly, I don't know. but these are the types of questions we are asking here at Innovative and putting to the test with our processes for developing our next generation metadata and discovery product development over this year, and as part of our participation in this year of MARC metadata transformation. So, what do you think? What worries you? What do you want us to test for you? What about this might be exciting to you? And Bill, do you have any responses in the chat?
Sorry, was muted. Laura had a comment. Stephanie had a comment, I'm sorry. If we remove fast headings, does it have implications for moving to BibFrame? It
doesn't have direct implications. So moving to BibFrame means taking the data, the metadata in your bibliographic records and having it rewritten as these resources. And so initially, it's my understanding that each library's triple created metadata will be separated from everyone else's. The engine will be preceded with MESH and Library of Congress name and subject authority records. And so the connections will be between the names and subjects and titles coming in and those authorities. So if you don't have MESH in your records, then my guess is you won't have that connection created in your instance within the new platform. That's my understanding. I'm only slightly ahead of you in terms of what we're doing. I'm listening as I can and learning as I can. So that is, that's my best guess to your question.
Great, I have quite a few more comments.
And actually, Andrea, before you, let me just, Bill, just give me 1 second. So, however, going forward, and I don't know how much forward, the idea would be to meld that metadata, right? So that when we can identify that this title in Andrea's library is the same as the title in Elizabeth's library, and if Elizabeth's record title resource is connected to MESH and Andrea's not, that link may be able to be created. Sorry, I just wanted to finish that thought.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, so Andrea comments, I know for a fact that Baker and Taylor catalogs everything for their CLS accounts without a physical item in hand. CLS stands for Customized Library Services. It's less customized than when we profiled it in 2007, and she added an unhappy emoji face.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. From Laura, many libraries no longer have professional catalogers, yet we are moving toward more complexity. Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Yeah.
You know, I think,
yeah, well,
I remember being in one of Alexa's online discussions a while ago, and and my thought was with one of the questions is I've now been cataloging or in the cataloging library world for 39, almost 40 years. And about every 10 years, we hit a point where the powers that be say, this will end the need for catalogers. And 40 years later, I am still here.
Yeah.
But that doesn't help the people who are losing their jobs or people working in libraries where it's thought that catalogers are no longer. I think those skills are huge, whether you call them catalogers or metadata specialists. Those are just words. I think having that understanding of translating the collections of the library into metadata stays important. Go ahead, Bill.
Elizabeth comments, and I think this is great, I can't help feeling that by the time there is any sort of consensus among institutions about what the future of cataloging is, it will be time for the next thing. There are too many different potentialities.
I hear you. And I think that's sometimes the fear, right? That we are libraries are often a step behind the publishing world and other groups with which we interact. You know, we're a little slow to change, and the web world has been in this linked data environment for quite a long time, and we are just looking at how to catch up. But we have this massive amount of legacy bibliographic data that's still really valuable, and we don't want to lose the context and the pieces that we've spent decades building in the process of moving. So that's that issue that we talked about at the beginning, was how do we move forward into a more modern way of communicating and searching our metadata and not lose that richness in the process.
Yes, and Andrea has a good follow-up to that. Our library paid for consultants who said that we had too many catalogers and they need to be reduced. We have 4 including me, but I don't catalog. 2 of us who are degreed catalogers. I agree with that we need more, not fewer professional catalogers in library of all types, but the trend is for us to be eliminated and replaced by vendors.
I'm so sorry. I don't really know that I can say anything except I'm so sorry. That's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and Sarah comments, and this is for, I'm sure a lot of small libraries feel this way, staff time and training means that we're usually late adopters. And Laura comments, personally, I think MARC has a lot of nice granularity built in. I wish we had left MARC as is and worked on a programming tool to pull the data out of MARC. And then she says, too late, though.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, my understanding is even with what Innovative is doing, the expectation is that acquisitions and cataloging and so on will still be working in MARC for several years. I'm stealing my own thunder at the end, but our first linked data product will be the discovery platform. And then sometime later, we'll be doing an analytics tool. And only thereafter will we start working on, I don't know what to call it, an ILS replacement that's a linked data environment. And even after that, in the conversations I'm hearing on the PCC meetings, is that the expectation and the people sitting at the table are you know, Harvard and Yale and Princeton and you know so on. They're all assuming that what we call our business data, circulation data, acquisitions data, electronic, you know, that will stay in MARC for the foreseeable future. So I think the answer is yes and no.
Great. I have a few more comments here from Galicia. Sorry if I pronounced your name badly. One thing that I think is exciting about linked data is that it has the potential to open up access to libraries to the world, just as Google did. And I think that's our goal. That should be the goal.
I agree.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anne comments that R3 does seem like it will be extremely expensive to work with, both staff-wise in learning as well as the amount of work to actually do on the records.
That is a concern, you know, and it's partly, what I'm hearing, it's partly retraining our brains to go from thinking about records to thinking about discrete resources. But I also think it's not easy to work our way through, and I think RDA was the same, and figure out how to document what we need to about the title that we're cataloging. So I hear you. And I'm hearing those same concerns on PCC and other places. By the way, the PCC has free training resources on the website. And so I suggest that people go and take a look. There's some good information there on learning to use RDA.
Just a couple more comments, and I'll let you move on. From Janice, we work with a Ferber-like view now as the default in our public library discovery layer. and that move has forced my library's hand into moving towards more standardization and access points. And we're wishing we do have authority modules in place. We feel the pain of vendor-supplied records that aren't cleaned up already.
Sure, and
then,
you know, I think getting authority control as the verb on our bibliographic data does become more important as we move to any kind of discovery platform that merges data, right? That puts all of the titles together, all of the translations together, and so on.
And then one final comment from Jero that I think wraps up this whole section. Great. Conceptually, this is really exciting. That's going to be a hard word for me to say. Operationalizing it is a little overwhelming. Operationalizing it is a little overwhelming. Putting it into weeds.
I agree. I totally agree. It's a hard word to say, but it is really true. So thank you for all of those comments. I agree. So my next hint is to try to use RDA for creating bibliographic metadata, because RDA uses a model that better prepares that data for linked data and doesn't make the assumption that we're structuring our data in bibliographic records. So I say that with a bit of a grain of salt. I know RDA is a little abstruse, if that's the right word, but it's what we have. So to sum up this third section, over these 15 years historical journey, when all is said and done, moving to a linked data environment will allow our systems to pull in data from the wider web. So what data would you want to put in front of your users? And go ahead and chat your responses. Some thoughts that I have is cover art, reviews, cost information, and so on. And I'd be happy to hear about other bits of information. But of course, we also talked about mesh and different vocabularies and terminologies and all of the rich information that's embedded into all of those authority records and identifiers. So when asking these, so what does asking all these questions about MARC and MARC modernization efforts for the past few years tell us? We can now better understand how to realize value today in our current systems while we wait for the release of those next generation platforms and the applications that may allow us more value in patron-facing applications, more avenues of metadata enhancement, and more flexibility in the ways we manage our resources, our metadata, and the constituents we serve, as well as the budget and the staff we need to invest in these platforms and applications. So I'm going to go past this question one because people are chatting away, which is great, and get started in section 4, which is setting a foundation for the future. So now that we have an idea of how we might try to address our current MARC paradox, and that the paradox being that we think we know we want to move forward, but we don't have a clear pathway, and to create better MARC that will help us get recognized by the recommenders and relevance engines, and to increase the speed and performance of our current MARC-based systems in ways that help us keep our patrons' attention and attentiveness while we grow and add new areas of patron service. And to reduce the increasing expense of maintaining our aged systems and infrastructures while we assemble our budgets and staff to allow us to grow into new areas of patron service that we, in conjunction with our institutions and communities, are defining. And how can we start to move into our future by capitalizing on the value-added insights our native linked data will bring to the table and when we use our current metadata and transform it. So I've just put in this slide, Innovative has a hashtag which was brought forward during ALA called How Knowledge Lives. I mentioned the term knowledge enablement earlier on, and I now want to define this while we're still together. And as I said, How Knowledge Lives is Innovative's theme for 2018, and I think it speaks to this. So I've used the term native here a few times, And what does that mean in terms of the primary or foundational purpose of metadata? With all the context we've been collecting in our notes fields and elsewhere in our MARC data since at least 1967, and that we plan with that native linked data to articulate into relationships. So knowledge enablement makes it possible for information to be comprehended and evaluated in the light of experience and incorporated into the knower's intellectual understanding of the subject. And when we talk about going native as defined by the knowledge life cycle, what exactly are we saying? Well, first, the knowledge life cycle is the cycle of the resource. All those resources we trade around in the knowledge economy ecosystem, and many of those resources that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and LinkedIn are using to compete against each other in the economy of intention. So to me, it means that the knowledge life cycle begins the moment a resources creator or creators and or contributors perform the knowledge creation act, thereby instantiating his, her, their, its thoughts and or actions into a resource, and continues for the life of that resource as it is created, sold, resold, distributed, and delivered by content creators, providers, and owners, being publishers, aggregators, academic institutions, the government, and other content and intellectual property owners in assorted forms and formats across assorted markets and marketplaces via a wide variety of channels. It's also purchased, licensed, and provided to patrons by libraries in assorted forms and formats across them, and it's sought, found, accessed, and consumed by library patrons and other end users of resources in their research, learning, inquiry, and other knowledge acquisition activities via search engines and digital marketplaces in the virtual classroom and through the learning management system, via connected applications and marketplaces like Amazon, and social or community applications such as LinkedIn, Tinder, Instagram, and the like. And these points should sound more familiar because we've brought them up several times when we talk about the word nativeness. The first instance, this is the bib frame term, so we can get a feel for how nativeness linked data may differ from MARC and how it all connects to the economy and the ecosystems I just mentioned. So the first instance of any work occurs at a unique moment in time. Unfortunately, instances or resources are not recorded, collected, or distributed sequentially against the Knowledge Creation Act. The flow of resources and their associated metadata through the life cycle is chaotic and accidental when viewed against the sequential instantiation of knowledge. The most accurately we assemble a work against this chaotic and accidental life cycle is to record the facts which correspond to the legal and monetary life cycles associated with each instance as we encounter it in its life cycle. And when we have enough details about instances recorded to extrapolate works based on a common or shared attributes of the individual recorded instances. So I think this speaks directly to what people were chatting about. Do I use, the large book print or all of these other pieces? Those, do we put it all into one record? And I would say, I don't know what we should do in our current MARC records, but on the other end, in the linked data platform, each identifier will be associated with the format in which it's published. So I guess it's hard, so we need to figure out how to go from here to there without mismatching that information. So knowledge creation is an act that produces a resource, and a performance by a creator or set of creators or contributes that instantiates knowledge into the resource. The first instance of any work is created, as we said, at the moment the creator or contributor performs the Knowledge Creation Act and the birth of intellectual property, and it's the moment of copyright origination. So this is what we try to think about when we talk about nativeness. It's documenting at this point of creation. That was a lot of words, and I'm sorry about that. So to go back to our car metaphor with self-driving cars, we suggest that you watch Catherine Harnish's, our Vice President of Product Development, Future of Library Presentations. They're about enabling users to be hands-free and still on course, about endless options that you decide when we talk and text and preset and editing on the fly or manually entering to get where we want to go in the manner we want to get there with the context and impact-sensitive help along the way. So that's where we want to go, where our data can allow people to, will be put in front of users as they need it, even if they don't necessarily come directly to us for it, and then bring us back. So let's go back to those principles we started with, starting with our knowns. Let's see what we can use in the discussion we had today to outlining our library's metadata future, and start with our knowns, defining our box with our institutional alignment and needs, the workflow, and your policies, and then define your box and get very local and specific about it. What do impact and engagement mean to us in our library, at our institution, serving the constituencies we serve, and meeting their needs as they and our funders define them? And then in terms of outlining what we do and why we do it, know what you do and why you do it in a way that's helpful and not overly time-consuming to document it, and what it drives for our users in our systems at our own institutions. And then give shape to your dreams. Reflect on your hopes and dreams against the use cases you've outlined, not about how we use metadata in our systems today, but rather thinking about the impact, engagement, and user experiences we want to provide to our users. And libraries are experimenting now. Follow those linked data for production projects. And in short, MARC got libraries to where we are, and it taught us a lot about the resources we care for and enabled us to successfully deliver resource or collection-focused library services. But it's not the vehicle that will take our services into the next generation with patron-focused service provisions. So consider the factors of usability, engagement, impact against the knowledge enablement tasks of learning, inquiry, literacy, research, and enjoyment. And then move to the next principle and sketch out your outcomes and be very specific there. What services do you and your library want to deliver? When, where, to whom, at what cost, and to what end? And connect all of these principles back to the steps of modernization we outlined earlier. Start small and address the biggest user needs first. And we all go farther and faster together. So talk to your vendors, talk to your partners, and talk to each other about your dreams. 2018 is the year that MARC modernization may begin to move from myth to reality. We start with better MARC data today, using the hints I gave along the way, so that search engine optimization and some small parts of the knowledge context we've documented in our MARC in notes and elsewhere all these years present the valuable context that only library metadata has, and that those recommendation algorithms needed in ways that Facebook, Google, and Amazon's engines recognize and then can use. And then our library metadata leads back to the assets we have in our libraries for our constituents, passing through the recommenders firewalls and into their search engines, and then get to where our library patrons can see it. Once we do what we need to do for these engines to recognize us, we can start to move into our future by capitalizing on those insights our improved MARC-driven linked data can supply, bringing our patrons back into our discovery engines and other knowledge enablement tools that only our libraries have to offer. Not just recall engines for a known title or ISBN discovered on Amazon, Facebook, or Google, but as a tool for deeper learning, research, literacy, and inquiry facilitation that drives impact and engagement for the library and its students, faculty, adult learners, K-12 patrons, business people, children, parents, and so on. That is, our whole user community. And about this, perhaps we can get excited. and then get started and make things happen. So to conclude, if we can break out of our MARC shell, and we started here with Webpack for dawn of a new day, as we move to Encore and other discovery tools, to where we can share and access metadata across the web and expand from our solar system of library data into the universe of knowledge. So I mentioned this earlier, but Innovative's path to linked data begins with the discovery, and then afterward we'll move to a new analytics platform and then work on an ILS replacement. So Bill, I turn this back over to you. There may be other questions and comments. I do see one question from Valerie. Yes, this is being recorded and it will be made available in the future. It will be, Bill, you can speak to that.
Yep, yeah, we'll definitely be sending out the recording. I do have quite a few comments and questions, if you don't mind, Martha, to share.
Not at all.
Okay, so.
You have 16 more minutes of my life.
Okay. A comment from William. Most of the records in our system are provided by vendors, and we are fixed with a system that works on MARC. Some of these LRM discussions end up being a little academic. We could make 3 to 4 perfect RDA LRM linked data records, but we have little control over new stuff and our old stuff.
Right. So what Innovative is doing now is developing, I think we're calling them gates, through which MARC data in a library catalog would flow through and be rewritten as these resources. So keep an eye on that process, and I know that we've picked as development partners people with varying degrees, varying kinds of metadata, both from people, from libraries who feel like they've kept up with everything and libraries who have not been able to do that. So I believe that the evidence we're collecting, it covers a broad range of metadata. Don't know if that responds to you at all or not.
And then Elaine commented, it seems to me these new systems we need better, more accurate authority modules. The new system seems to want to use, or will use, the authority records that exist in LC, but because of the prevalence of keyword searches, those authority records are not given enough attention in systems.
And that's exactly the point. Once we move our metadata into a linked data platform, the connections between the resources, be those titles or concepts/subjects, then you bring in all of the data in those authority records right in front of the users, and they can use what's there to deepen their search. That's exactly the point, as I understand it.
Felicia comments, I think we have to adopt what we need as it pertains to our individual institutions as best we can. There is so much involved in the world of metadata and linked data that we could never implement every new and upcoming practice. Awareness is key. Staying aware of what's ahead is important.
Amen.
Yeah.
She stated it beautifully.
Let me just start wading through a lot here. Linda asks if we have more info on Catherine's recordings and speeches. Is there some links we can provide in the follow-up? Okay.
We can. Bill, there's I think on the Innovative webpage, there's a place where recordings are available, but also all of the open ones, and I don't know if Catherine's are there or not, I haven't looked, but Innovative has a YouTube channel, which is where all of our hot topic recordings live, and some of Catherine's may be there, but Bill and I will be sure that in the email you get at the end of this, we will be sure we know where Catherine's recordings are and included in that follow-up email.
Great. And Andrew has, I think it's a great comment. Wouldn't it be cool if every time someone texted, tweeted, or searched for something on their library, they get a notification item, physical or virtual, was available to borrow from their local public library or academic library if they're a student at that school? I think
that would be awesome.
Great. Yes. All right. Here's the. I'm not going to put a dollar. I'm not going to put a value on this, but a couple of people have asked, how much will the III linked data product cost? I would like to know that as well. What will the II linked data product cost? And I know your answer to this, but I'll let you guys.
My answer is I have no idea, but please talk with your account manager. I don't even know if it's been absolutely confirmed yet, and we may be looking for more development partners. I'm not sure about that either, but we can, if you're interested, then you could send an email to Bill or me, and we can forward that to Catherine.
Right, and that follows, Laura actually commented, will Innovative do user testing on next-gen Discovery Catalog? And I think that's probably going on right now with development partners, I would think.
That's exactly right.
Right, but we are still, as you mentioned, we're still looking for other development partners, I believe, correct?
Yeah, I believe that's correct, and I do know that we expect to have a prototype ready by the end of September. So right now what we have is there's some canned searches showing how the context engine will work, but the expectation is that we'll actually have a working model available by the end of September.
Great. Well, that's all the comments that we have right now. I just have to say this has been a great group, the best commenting group and chatting group that we've had, I think, in all the hot topics that I've been in. And I also have to give a big shout out to Chris Reimers, sorry if I said that wrong, who was actually forwarding all of your chats to me because I was not able to see them for some technical reasons. So I'm sorry, Chris, if you didn't get to pay as well of attention as you would have liked to, but you definitely saved me in terms of being able to facilitate the chatting, and definitely great comments and great questions by everyone in the group. Thank you very much. So to wrap up today, just highlighting a few more hot topics that we have coming up here. We're getting ready to flush out the rest of the schedule. We already have scheduled for August, engagement basics with Tatiana Bryant. September, user experience basics with Rebecca Blakiston. And then for more in-depth sessions, we have boot camps where you dig deeper into these topics. For 2018, we have 2 coming up in September on project management and on metadata. And you're teaching the one on metadata, I assume, Martha?
I am, and actually I forgot, okay. It's called Metadata Essentials, and I forgot to update this slide, but that's the boot camp workshop that I mentioned where I work with the professional in publishing metadata.
Great. And then in November, Martha Waltz will be doing her well-received, and I'm not even sure how many times you've done it now, but I know it's been very popular, cataloging essentials boot camp. 4 times, yeah, and from demand. Basically, that's so.
Yes, and let me say my subtitle for it is For the Accidental Cataloger.
Great. I think there's a lot of us out there. For all of our workshops and online learning offerings that we have here at Innovative, you can go to our online registration portal at bookwen.com/innovative. You can see everything there that we have to offer. Starting to go into 2019, and we'll definitely be flushing out the rest of that schedule as we get into the 3rd quarter here of 2018. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and please tell us what you think, tell us what you need, and invite us into your library. Again, thank you to Martha, thank you to all of your chat questions and comments today. That's it here from Innovative. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.